Hello everyone. So what we're going to be doing is looking at creating prefabs and looking at the different ways that we can create the prefab. A prefab is basically a complex object, game object, that has been bundled up so that it can be recreated over and over with little extra work. So you can think of prefabs as maybe soldiers, a bunch of them all over the place. Or trees that you create yourself, or something that you download, some type of model that you download, characters that you just kind of want to place here and there. But sometimes you need to modify them and so on. And we'll look at that how it affects when we modify prefabs and so on. Okay, so let's go ahead and start creating a prefab. What we'll do is we'll start with a plane. And so on there we'll put like a stick figure type of character. Okay, so I'll create, start with a sphere, kind of its head, reduce the size a little bit on that. And then cube, which will be the body. And then we'll resize that. Let's do that again, a little bit smaller. Move it up. Remember, I'm using these tools right here, but if you don't see me going up here, because I'm using the shortcut keys. Okay. All right. So we'll start with that. Okay. And what I'll do is I'll make this a child of the sphere, the cube. So that is one object. Okay. So that means if I select this, it moves it with the body of the cube and so on. Okay. And we'll rename it to stick figure. Okay. All right. So there we just created a game object, right? And so in order to, in terms of just sometimes what it helps is having a prefab that you can again recreate over and over, just drag and place in there in one scene or another. Okay, and then you have to recreate in that scene or keep recreating the object, or if you have like 10, 20 of these prefabs and you need to update it some way, then it's much easier than going back to each individual object and updating each individual object that you've created. All right, so imagine this as a very complex object for now. Right, we'll make it a little bit more complex. But basically, it's very simple. Once you've created an object on here, what you want to do is go down to your assets folder. And actually, you can just click and drag it onto your assets folder, and it becomes a prefab. But a good idea before we do that is to create a prefab folder. Okay, so I'll put that in there. And notice when I click and drag it from the hierarchy window to the prefab folder, you see it's a blue cube there. And that lets us know that it is a prefab. All right. So anything with that blue cube, usually that's what it's Unity is letting you know that is a prefab you're dealing with. So notice up here, it's a prefab. So watch as I click and drag from here, and I could create several of these. So I'm instantiating them into the scene. Okay, so basically when we say they're instantiated, means that they're linked. These right here are linked to the prefab in our prefab folder. Okay, So anyway, so as you can see, I've placed them in different spots there. You know, you could use script to do that. You can use also script to create by just hitting a button, creating several of these, and so on. So those are, you know, one of the ways that you. This is one of the ways that you can create these prefabs just by clicking and dragging, as you just saw me do, onto the scene. Okay. Now, say that you need to update it. Again, let's assume that we have hundreds of these here, and we don't want to go through each one and then update each one. So, let's say this one, for example, say that I want to put an arm to it. Okay. Or, you know, I want to put an arm to all of them. So normally, if these were individually created and not as a prefab, you would go through that process of creating each one of those. Okay, so just put it right next here. So if you can imagine, have 20, 30 of these, then I would have to go through each one of these to do that, right? But here's one way, in terms of, you just saw how I created this arm right here, right? So I'll just duplicate that, by the way. Make sure I got that selected. Then it's going to make it a whole lot easier. So I'll duplicate that. Command D or Control D makes a duplicate of it. Okay, so now we have the arms. But as you can see, it's only on this one object. But what you could do, if you select the prefab, make sure you've selected the prefab and not one of these other child object. It has to be the parent object, the prefab, the one with the blue cube on there. So you'll notice up here, you have these options. What you want to go to is overwrite and select apply to all. And notice now it has applied it to all my prefabs. The older version, I believe, just has a button to click apply. So anyway, so again, so once you select the prefab, you come over to override. It's not showing anymore because it's not updated, but then apply to all. Okay. All right. So that's one way we can do that. The other way is to actually go into to isolating the prefab itself. So I can double click on the prefab and notice I've isolated it, right? So assume that we want to change the arm position, right? So let's do that. Alright, so let's say that that's where we want to position it. Okay, now notice it's isolated. Okay, you don't see any other planes or any other stick figure. So basically I've isolated this by double clicking on it, and now I need to go back to my scene. And remember, we double clicked on the stick figure here, which the prefab. And now I'll go back to my scene by clicking on scenes, or I can click on this button also. So I'm clicking scenes, and notice all my other ones have been updated with the arms raised down or lower down. Okay, so that's another way to keep that in mind. Um, Again, basically, it's pretty simple in that sense, in terms of just uh, updating your prefabs. So keep in mind that by dragging multiple um, prefabs, it doesn't make your file, like for example, if I were to drag 100 of these, it's not going to make my file or my game 100 times larger because I'm dragging these prefabs onto my scene. They're just, again, they're just being instantiated, and so it's sort of like a shortcut on your desktop. You know that it's not the actual application; it's just a shortcut to the application, right? So that's you can think of it that way too. So it's very minor addition to, in this case, to your game. Besides adding and changing the positions, we can add, for example, materials to it. There are all kinds of things. So, you know, so let's say, so this would be a stick figure material. Change that to red. Again, I could double click here. Let's drag it to here. Or there. Okay, so now I've made, I've added these material, which you could do the same thing, same way we could have done it in the scene itself, but just wanted to show you that we can do it, add materials that way too. As you can see, we can click and drag the prefabs to just place them, all over the place, right? But what if at runtime you want them to be randomly placed? What if you go into another scene and you want them, again, to be in random places, random numbers, and so on? So in that case, if you want the prefabs to be created as you um, go into the play mode or at runtime, you can do it with scripting. So we're going to do that. We're going to learn how to do that now. Okay. So we are going to use the instantiate method to be able to do that. So let's go ahead and create a script to start that. We'll name it prefab creator. So prefab creator. Okay, so here we have our script, our template of the script to start with. We need to be able to reference our stick figure or any game object. So here we have our script, and so we have our template. So we need to reference our game object. So then we'll use that game object in, when we want to instantiate it. So to start with, we need to reference it. So we'll type in public game object, and we'll give it an instance name of stick figure. And you can name it whatever you want actually, but the idea here is that we're going to be able to, in our inspector, we should be able to click and drag a game object onto that property there. Okay, so we'll see you'll see what I'm talking about once we get there. We'll use the instantiate method to be able to have the script create that game object through our coding. All right, so we'll start with game object, and we'll use our instantiate method, and then just so we don't forget, so here we go. We're going to call it game object in there. Open and close parentheses. Let's put a semicolon in there. So now we're going to call our game object. So that'll be the stick figure. Then we're going to, within the parameters, we're going to call the game object. We're going to position it, and then also in terms of the rotation. Okay, let's call our stick figure the instance there. And so the position. So for now, we'll just position it at 0. And well, actually, let's see. Well, let's put 5 in there. Just position a little bit further up. And then the next thing is the rotation. So the quaternion, we're going to be using that. All right, so there's the thing for the quaternion. Basically, is the rotation of the current object, the object that we're going to reference, which is in this case the stick figure. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and build that. Okay, so there's our prefab creator. Let's put the we'll put it on the main camera. We'll put the script on the main camera there. We could have put it on any one of these objects, but I'm going to delete some of these objects. It has to be something that's going to stay there all the time. All right, so as you'll notice, we have our property here that we need to fill in. So we could have gone and chosen one of these stick figures, but like I said, I'm going to get rid of some of these. So I'm just going to go to the prefab, and there's our prefab right there. So I'll go ahead and get rid of these. Okay, so as you can see, it's totally empty there. Now when we run it, yep, there it is, placed a little off, but at least you know it's on there. So we can change that, obviously. Let me raise that a little bit. X value probably maybe 2. Okay, a little more, but anyway, you get the idea. See where it's being placed, right? Okay. So as you can see, when we run it, it gets placed there, but it always will get placed in the same spot each and every time, right? So what we want to do here, and so you saw that we, just using that, this method right here, instantiate method, we can have it so that at runtime it goes ahead and puts a prefab on our scene. All right, so but now what we want to do is have it maybe create 4 or 5 different type of game stick figures and randomly place them on our scene in different spots. So this could be like trees maybe, or enemies, or obstacles, and you want the obstacles each and every time to be in different position, like from one scene to the other or something like that. And you can certainly do that with prefabs. So you can use prefabs in not just one scene, but in other scenes as you need it. And of course, you can also use the script. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do, basically, here's the idea. We're going to take this, and we're going to modify it somewhat. We don't want this to be a constant number. Obviously, we're going to make it into a variable, so we need to come up with a variable number, and we want to make sure it's going to be a random variable number. Then we'll need to use the for loop, okay, so that it will iterate, so it will iterate a certain number of the prefabs, okay, so we can set that up, and then so in the iteration it'll run this code right here. We want it to run this code, whatever many times we want to set it up for, okay. So that will be in the block of the for loop, and we'll tell it to run it like 4 or 5 times or whatever, something like that. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and set that up. All right. Here we go. So as I said before, I'm going to make this into a variable number. So we'll set that up. All right. So that we're going to give that vector3 instance name. Call it spawn values. All right. Come back in here. Let's create our for loop, and then we'll take this and put it within the block of the for loop. All right. So for and semi parentheses, and you open and close brackets. So let's go ahead and cut that out. Okay, so let's go back and set up our for loop. All right, so to start with, we're going to create our counter. Give it what type of counter we want it to be, just a number. So we use I as a variable name. Of course, you can call it whatever you want. Start at 1. Then we're going to create our Boolean condition. So we're going to call a variable that we just defined, and let's see, less than or equal to, we'll just run it about 5 times or 4 times or so. Yeah, 5 times. Colon, and then how we wanted to increment it. We want to increment it by 1s. So it'll add up, keep adding it up as it goes through its iteration. All right, so that's just, to get it to iterate about 5 times. All right. So as I said, we need to change this up right here. We're going to use an instance name on there. Okay. So we need to define it. Okay, so what we'll need to do is now create the variable number, the vector variable 3 number. So call it spawn position equal to new vector 3, open close parentheses, semicolon. All right, so we need, as I said, we want it to be a random number. So we'll type in random, and then we want it to have a range, right? We'll use the range number that we will create over here. All right, we'll use that, which, as you can see, let's go ahead and open and close parentheses there. Okay. So we'll have, so we'll use again the spawn values, not the spawn position, dot x position. Remember this, we have the x, y, and z position. And then we want spawn values again, dot x. Now we'll leave this positive so we can have a range, a negative positive range. Okay. Okay. So now we'll set our y position to 1f. We'll leave that constant, but then we'll have this again. Basically, we'll make this a random number, which is, we'll use this also, but it's going to be whatever the z number that we come up with. All right, so we'll change this to z. So again, this is our, this will be a z value. Okay, the z value. This will be the y value. This will be the x value. So the idea is that the for loop will run about 5 times, and it'll run this code, and basically it'll come up with a random number for our position, and it'll instantiate it 5 times, because it's going to, we've told it to run them, you know, the for loop 5 times. Okay, let's build it. Everything checks out. All right, so let's go back to Unity, and hopefully it updated. Let's select our camera where our script is, and notice that we have the x. Here's a spawn value number. We still have the stick figure on there, and so we'll change it here to maybe 4, and then we'll leave the y value alone, and let's do 5. Okay, again, this it'll be converted to a negative and positive numbers, so it'll be left and right a little movement, and 5 a little deep back and forth. Okay. Alrighty, let's go ahead and run it. All right, so as you can see here, we have this 5 different stick figures, but they're all in the same position. Okay, so they are there. So now we want to do is scatter them. Okay, so let's set that up. So remember, we're going to now change this value. Okay, right here. Instead of a fixed value, we want to use our spawn values, or actually our spawn positions. Sorry. In that, you know, again, this number that gets created randomly. Okay, so spawn position. So we're going to call this instance name, which will, you know, all this will be random numbers, and then they'll be placed in, you know, in this position right here. Okay, that should do it. All right, let's go back. And they're in different places. See, there's actually there's 5. As you can see, they were probably on top of each other. Okay. One more time. And as you can see, they're all in different spots. All right. Hopefully you can use this script or use any. Hopefully you'll build your prefabs. It's again a great way to minimize in terms of how much rendering your game has to do, and also it's a great way to fill in your scene.